Hey, what's up, guys? This is Brian at Whisper Status 74. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the channel. This is the first time you are seeing me. Please consider liking and subscribing. We are real tech for real people. Today's video will be on the Sony A90J Master Series OLED. Probably the most popular and sought after display this year, even though this year has pretty much just begun as new displays start to trickle out. The A90J has a very interesting place in the lineup of displays this year, especially considering the rest of Sony's lineup. We're going to talk about that, talk about my thoughts on spending a few hours with it. I do not have it in-house, but many of you wanted to know what my thoughts were after my last video that we did with Robert Zahn, Value Electronics, where he has the 55-inch and we'll have the 83-inch shortly. But spending time there, running a bunch of demos, you'll see those demos on this video as I'm done speaking here and giving you my initial thoughts. We'll run through those demos. We'll have some extra commentary as well.
There can be only one.
Alright guys, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We are going to do a short beginning of this video where I'll give you my key thoughts about the panel, and then at about the 9-minute mark I will do a 20-minute deep dive discussion and my thoughts of every angle of this panel. But for those of you that are just tuning in for something fast, the Sony A90J is about the best panel I've seen in regards to OLEDs. The only OLEDs I think that can really hang in there are Panasonic's and the ZX, which is to its left, and the Z9 from last year. The ZX and Z9 are about $30,000. You're seeing it in a bright room. It's at Value Electronics in Scarsdale, New York. You're also seeing the backlit brush metal remote, which actually does a great job and is very premium. Like a lot of the Master Series, you're paying for that build quality, though for my thoughts, a lot of OLEDs do look very similar. They can only be so thin, though this one is even more thin and does have even less of a bezel around it. You're seeing daytime performance. It does have some reflections. It's on par with other leading OLEDs. Keep in mind there is a skylight above me and store windows directly behind me that take up the entire front of the store. So we are putting it to the test. It behaves very similarly to the other OLEDs that are in the room, the A9G, the CX, and the ZX, as well as the Panasonic in the back corner. It is, again, very minimalist. It is gorgeous. At the end of this run, we will get into a more deep dive in all aspects. Sony has its accuracy. It is always accurate out of the box, has a very cool look to it. These feet can be in two positions. They can be folded in to also make the display basically flush to the table that it's on. Also can obviously be hung as well. Master Series typically have a very chunky back panel with a lot of cable management. Even the A9S Master Series had that last year. I don't see it as much here. It doesn't have that cubed look, which, you know, you can't really make them too chunky. They are OLEDs. So, but I wish there was a little bit more cable management, a little bit more covering all of this, as in years past. You have the two HDMI 2.1s, which is a drawback compared to the LG line. One of them is also eARC, which is also a drawback. Otherwise, it'll be absolutely fine for gaming. 4K 120 out of the box. VRR, auto low latency modes, will show up in a firmware update, which we've all talked about. It'll be here at some point. There's an A9G right there. Now here we are with nighttime performance, I should say. It looked amazing during the day, but it is next level at night. The 1300 nit peak brightness, as you've seen with many other reviewers, and even with Jonathan, the reviewer at Value Electronics, able to achieve that in vivid. Not many people watch displays in vivid mode, as you see me going through the settings here. One of the knocks on the display for me is I wish there were more picture presets. There were more years ago with Sony, which for me limits the ability to customize the display. Now you can make it look any way you kind of want it to, but I'd rather have more presets in both SDR and HDR. The peak brightness is obviously visible in its vivid but in the cinema and the other movie modes, it's much less, but does still seem to have a little bit more punch, which is definitely welcome and is a clear step forward for OLEDs. To the left of it is an A9G. Now, looking back and forth at them, it's hard to see that one is much more bright than the other. So in terms of value, that's the one drawback with the Sony A90J, is it is very expensive. You are paying for that peak brightness. You are paying for that image quality. But at its core, it is still a Sony OLED and as equally beautiful as the others. You can see the specular highlights here in this LG demo. And truly a gift to be able to have a high peak brightness and OLED black, something mini LED and micro LED have been promising for such a long time. We never really thought that OLEDs would be the one to deliver. Panasonic has been doing it the last few years, and Sony right behind them. Though I do feel this will be the most popular and probably the best overall display this year between 4K and 8K. And it's probably the biggest no-brainer of many generations where you can just pretty much say, yeah, pick it up. If you can swing it, it's definitely very, very easy to recommend, other than its high cost and missing some of those gaming features out of the box. But primarily, its biggest drawback is its price. I will mention this later in the video as well. Master Series tend not to drop in price, so it will remain high, especially with the A80J coming in and also offering equal sizes, except for the 77. It is stunning, and it does catch your eye even among the OLEDs around it. Now, what I am surprised is even in a bright room, the panel still does well. These are out of vivid mode, by the way. Even during the daytime scene earlier, that was also in custom. It wasn't in vivid mode. But it is beautiful. And again, it's one of the easiest displays to recommend, whether you like Sony or not. Just loving picture quality, a lot like the Panasonic that was here earlier. It's easy to recommend if you're just a fan of great picture quality versus a fan of a specific brand. Sony also known for retaining shadow detail even with their OLEDs. There's an AAH in the corner. My friend Jennifer Gala's demo right there. But very, very impressive. And again, I'm predicting it'll, not that's a big prediction, it'll be probably the most popular and the most loved panel of the year for both 4K and 8K. All right, guys, it is gorgeous. I'm going to come in here at the 9-minute mark with my deep face-to-face analysis or my thoughts on it. Thank you all for listening. I will see you in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. I had to do this short part because I want to show you the panel, and also you know how long-winded I can be. All right, guys, I will see you in a few seconds. I hope everybody is doing well, and thank you as always. Now, my honest thoughts on the Sony A90J Master Series are all over the place. I am a huge Master Series fan, going from the Z9D to the Z9G, the Z9F, the A9G, the A9S Master Series, which I had for about 3 months. So I know the panel pretty well, as the A9G line still looks amazing to this day, and still is the panel, especially at 77 inches, that grabs your attention whenever you walk into a Best Buy or any other retailer. So having the A9S Master Series, again, spending time with all the settings, running games on it, I know pretty much what the picture quality looks like, especially being a fan of Sony for so many years. The A90J, however, for me, what is most interesting is we were the first actually to report that the A90 A90H was canceled last year. They were supposed to come out with that model. It was pushed back. So many of us figured that this panel would be 8K. They skipped the year, and a lot of us have a little trepidation with 8K. Many of us, the majority of us, think that we're not ready for it. I personally don't think we're ready for it, but I was glad to see that the A90J was still going to be 4K. The lineup of the A9G and the A8H, as well as the A9S, really puzzled many. Didn't know which one to purchase. The A9G was getting older. The A9S was new, but essentially an A9G. The A8H was right in the middle. The A8H didn't have a 77-inch or a smaller. That's all being rectified this year with the A80J, which will also film at Value Electronics, I believe, in 2 weeks. They're going to be the lower end, which will probably be more similar to the A8H with a new processor. And we're going to touch on that right now as we talk about these panels. But the A8H, or at least I should say, the A80J, what'll be nice, it'll have the sizes that many of you need. You'll be able to purchase a 77-inch, and it won't be a downgrade in any significant way. It just won't be as bright as the A90J. Now, back to the A90J, the brightness that it yields, the 1300 nits, whether it's in vivid or not, is still a large leap forward. Panasonic has had heat sinks for the last few years. And we've all seen LG and Sony kind of stay the same since, I would guess, the C8 or the A9G. I get them all confused. AHF, AFJ. There's a million different letters for them, but they've remained largely the same. And I'm not one to get too excited about processors. I don't put a lot into the processing of this and the processing of that. I do feel that between Samsung, LG, and Sony, the processing has been good for many, many years. They keep changing the processors. This one is a cognitive processor. I'm sure it is better at doing certain things. But for me, the big difference with the A90J Master Series is the extra size at 83 inches, though I wish there still was a 77-inch, because the leap from 65 to 83 inches is very expensive. But that peak brightness is something that we've all wanted. Those of us that love LEDs, to have a high contrast ratio of an OLED, to have those perfect black levels with that high peak brightness. Now, is that high peak brightness bright for an LED? Not really, but when you add the contrast ratio in, it's going to jump off the screen, and it does. It is a gorgeous image, and that peak brightness to me is worth quite a bit, which leads me into our next issue. It is very, very expensive. Master Series R. It's build quality, it's prestige. It's also, there's a calibration and a QC, but the calibration out of the box, it is very accurate out of the box. You can still get it calibrated, of course, but you are paying for that little bit of extra care. The challenge is it's very expensive for a 4K display when it's competing price-wise with 8K displays. So going back into Sony, to me, it's what saves their lineup this year. I think the lineup is very samey in regards to other companies offering, mini LEDs. They're trying different things. Hisense is doing their dual panel. Everyone's trying something a little bit different, and Sony's putting out an LED with the Z9J and the 950J. Though I'm excited for them, I expect them to be largely the same, especially since the Z9G was a clear step forward. I hope the Z9J can hang in there as well. And the 95J, I'm expecting to be very similar to the 950H, other than the HDMI 2.1 ports. But we're actually going to have the 95J in-house here, so I will be glad to go through that with you. Back to the A90J. Spending time with it, it's absolutely gorgeous, and I fully believe it is the can't-miss panel this year. It's one of those panels that you don't even have to see. It really does look that good. Now, watching it at Value Electronics, got to remember I'm beside their Panasonics that just sold out from last year, the Hollywood grade monitors, the CX, the A9S, the A9G, and the ZX. So that is a very, very heavy company, and it still stands out. It still has that little bit of extra punch. Now, does it look as good as the Panasonic? The Panasonic was calibrated to that Hollywood standard. I would say that image was more natural, but the A90J, for most of us walking into the room, added that extra pop that makes you really, it just kind of like the A9G pulls your eye to it. And the extra brightness is noticeable. Was it as good as the ZX at $20,000? It's not, it's brighter, but the ZX just has a little extra something, maybe because it's 80 plus inches and 8K versus a 55-inch A90J that I had my hands on. But the fact that it's even in the same conversation and maybe even beats it means a lot. So it's one thing that I can recommend without hesitation, is that it's gorgeous. And it takes everything that Sony's done in the past and turns it up a notch. That extra peak brightness is evident. Now, I did notice that obviously in Vivid, you can clearly see how much brighter it is. That brightness does dissipate as we get into the other picture modes, as it should. So into the drawback a little bit is you are paying a significant amount for peak brightness that's not always going to be visible to you, meaning that when you're in other presets, it's not going to stand out as much and it's not going to peak out at that peak brightness. Kind of meaning if you're going to drive, it's almost like having a really, really fast car that achieves that driving only one way on one specific track. That's not a great analogy, but the fact of the matter is it is an OLED with an amazing contrast ratio. So perhaps in a dark room, yes, you'll notice that extra peak brightness and specular highlights in HDR, but I would argue that even looking at it beside the A9G looked amazing. So if you can afford the A90J, I would definitely go for the A90J simply because that peak brightness is amazing to have in your pocket. However, if you can't, and there's an 880J, an AAH, or an even A9G, the differences will become negligible because the picture quality of those OLEDs are amazing. Master Series, typically known for their build quality. The A90J is slightly more slim than the other OLEDs. And the Master Series typically has this amazing cable management I didn't really see on the back of the A90J this time. Not to say that it's not still good. I didn't spend enough time with it to hide any cables. All we had was it playing, its internal apps and a Blu-ray player tucked underneath. But Master Series are typically very intricate. But this is the challenge with OLEDs. They're all slim. They all look amazing. They're all very sleek. If you try making the build quality of the Master Series more elaborate, it's only going to become meatier and chunky, which is exactly what you don't want from an OLED. Even with the A9S Master Series, as gorgeous as it is, it looked very similar to other OLEDs. So that's only as far as you can go. Even the GX from LG, though it lays flush, at times you're like, which one is it? It doesn't really stand out like the LG wallpaper from a few years ago. So there's only so far you can go with the design. The sound is definitely a jump up. Master Series always have excellent sound, and the A90J is no different. Now, can you use that instead of a sound bar or instead of a surround sound system? I would never think a TV can actually accomplish that, but the sound was definitely impressive and is fine standalone. But my main attraction to it goes back to that picture quality, back to the accuracy of Sony. It just has, those blacks never really waver. So with LG, and we all struggled with this, the raised blacks of the CX, I had the A9S compared to my CX, and the blacks never wavered. It is a very beautiful image. It's a very natural image. And now with the extra peak brightness, it is a very vivid and stunning image. Again, I would argue as you go into the other picture modes, it does tend to look a lot like the A9G. It doesn't really stand out as much. That would probably base itself on content and explosions, things that typically would use those extra nits. But really, really beautiful panel. The main concern, though, is, again, it's very, very expensive, and it's 4K. So why I say that is you are future-proofing in a way because it has HDMI 2.1, which I'll segue into. Now I know the video is getting long. It's 4K. Now, I fully believe 4K is good as long as you want it to be. It's just a very big investment. If you look at the 83-inch, the price should be dropping sometime today, but I'm thinking $7,500 to $8,000. And one thing I'll say about Master Series is they do not come down in price as quickly as, say, Samsung. There is a legacy to that. And having the A80J around is going to keep the price of the A90J high, at least as far as my experience goes with all of the Master Series panels, other than maybe the Z9F. A lot of them stayed very expensive, and just gorgeous panel. It's just a premium. And if you're in a dark room, you probably would be able to save some money with the other OLEDs. Or I'd like you to see, and we'll do this in another discussion, a lot of times if you can go with a larger OLED of better value, whether it's the A80J or the A80H, or if you want to stay in the Sony lineup. The limitations, for me, Sony's limitations in OLEDs are their settings. I don't feel they really have the headroom to really change the image all that much. The presets are limited. There's not as many as you would see on competing LGs. So I do feel like, as beautiful as the image is on the A90J, the image is somewhat limited to what the panel can do. You can't make it look very, very different in terms of the different presets. Now, you can obviously customize it and change it, but I do like having more options. I feel the same way about Samsung. We did look at the the A9 or the 900A yesterday, the AK. I would like to see more settings and more flexibility other than calibration, just settings that you can change. That didn't change much from years past. And other than tone mapping, that didn't change much either with Sony's OLED lineup. I always felt like their lineups with Sony, their settings were just limited. The other thing, other than being expensive, is the HDMI 2.1. There is only 2 of them. They are full bandwidth. Now, I have a CX behind me. I use all of the HDMI 2.1 ports on it. I do think 2 is not enough. However, you will have HDMI 2.1 splitters probably coming out in the next few months. Who knows with everything that's happening? There are a lot of shortages. I do think that it's better to have it than none. I do also think that there are some issues with 4K 120. I have not seen them myself. I do feel that Sony will work that out. I'm glad that there's 4K 120 available out of the box. I personally do feel that not having variable refresh rate and VRR or auto low latency mode out of the box is, after having the 900H out for almost a year, is something they should have as out-of-the-box features. If you have not experienced any of those gaming features, you're still going to be able to enjoy 4K 120 and 4K 60 with a very gorgeous image and instantaneous pixel response, being that it is an OLED, so the motion will be amazing. And the PS5 apparently does interact with a Sony panel and has a form of VRR, though it doesn't really say it or anything. It's apparently is just compatible with the PS5. For somebody like me that has a PC, a Series X, and a PS5, I would need those other features. They apparently are coming in the spring, maybe even summer, or maybe even winter. So to me, that is a drawback. I would like it to have more functionality than panels that are already out from LG and Samsung. So that is a minus. 2 HDMI inputs is also a minus. I'm glad they are there and they are full bandwidth. Now, I did mention this in another video. Vincent from HTV Tests had reported that the panel could not do 4K 120 with Dolby Vision. The Series X Xbox is starting to push Dolby Vision. That is another minus. Is it a huge big deal? I don't know. Obviously, there's very few games, and it's relatively, or still limited to the Insider program, so it's not even really available for all of us. It remains to be seen if it's a big deal, and it remains to be seen if it can be rectified, because apparently Sony is able to do that with their chip-based Dolby Vision. Versus it being a firmware internally. Vincent knows that much better than I do, but it's also a consideration. Something to think about in this one way. When you pay more than what's out there, it should have more than what's out there, and that's a consideration if you are a gamer. But so those few things. It's very expensive. The design is beautiful, but the cable management lacks a little bit. I do feel OLEDs from Sony don't have the settings headroom of some of their competitors, even Panasonic and LG, in regards to OLEDs. It's expensive. I mentioned that several times. But other than that, those sound like, and obviously the HDMI 2.1. I do feel Sony will take care of that. They will make that right. I cannot see them, especially with a new processor. They will do that for you guys. It's just a matter of paying full price for those things before they're here. I don't agree with doing that. I don't agree with paying for things that won't be there. But as far as how it looks and how it performs, it is easily right now the best looking panel this year. Better looking than anything I've seen last year outside of the ZX, which is again, $20,000-$30,000. It'll be $30,000 at the same size, and I can't even tell if that's due to resolution or the fact that the panel is so much larger. But right now, I can honestly almost predict, it's not like it's a big prediction, it's probably going to be the best looking panel this year, whether it's 4K or 8K. Now we have panels to see, again, the G1, the C1. I do feel they'll be largely the same. The G1 will be an interesting, its peak brightness will not be nearly as high, but we'll still see how they match up. But I think the A90J is going to stand alone, which is so interesting considering that Sony's lineup this year looked only so-so, and to have a star like the A90J in there is pretty amazing. It is going to be gorgeous. I can't wait for you guys to see it in store. They're starting to show them in Best Buys. You can go in and see them. If you do ask them to put on some content for you other than demos, they may oblige you. It's just expensive, but it is gorgeous. And what's interesting with the 4K shootout that Value Electronics puts on, which we lost last year and we'll do this year, you will have 4K versus 4K and 8K versus 8K, and then they'll all compete against one another. It can pretty much predict the A90J will probably be the winner of that. That's how good it looks. However, at its core, it's still a Sony OLED, and if you don't really want that peak brightness and you want to save some money, the other panels are going to be gorgeous as well. I'll see the A80J in a few weeks, but the Sony A90J is pretty much the can't miss 4K panel, or can't miss panel in general. I do think it's going to look better than even any other 8K panel this year, simply because there are no 8K OLEDs this year other than the ZX from LG, which it was next to. And when those are all, when we get the 83-inch, we'll compare that to the ZX side by side. We'll run it through some tests. But right now, to me, it's hands down the most impressive display that I've seen this year, and it'll probably be the best display this year. And other than those few drawbacks, those are my thoughts. All right, guys.